Hello, beautiful beings. Thank you so much for dropping by this video. A warm welcome to anyone who's new, and of course, a very warm welcome back to those who have been hanging out for this channel or subscribers, the frequent flyers. Thanks for dropping by. Very briefly, this channel is dedicated to helping people understand the difference between authentic non-duality and nonsense non-duality, literally non-sense, nonsensical, false, bullshit, fake non-duality, often called Neo-Advaita. And the whole purpose of understanding the difference between the two is to escape from fake non-duality. It's truly like a mental cult. It creates a mind maze that is very hard to escape from. And lastly, I would ask you, before I hop into things, to please not to blindly believe anything I say. Please listen to what I have to say. Please come to an intellectual understanding of what I'm saying, and then listen deeply within yourself. Do your own research. Do prayer, meditation, sadhana, spiritual practice, and then come to know the truth for yourself. And while you're at it, please don't blindly believe anything anyone says, especially if they claim to be teaching non-duality. Doubly so if they claim to be teaching non-duality and they're on YouTube. So that's my disclaimer. This is a series of talks about my view, and I'm not alone in this view, that Neo-Advaita is just evil beyond words. So I've entitled this, Neo-Advaita is a demonic religion, and I've added in a new word, a twisted demonic religion. So I spoke quite a bit about the religious part in part one. Here in part two, I'd like to talk about the twisted part. By twisted, what I mean is emotionally convoluted, not clear, emotionally manipulative. So I'll give you some examples. So at a Neo-Advaita satsang, you'll sometimes see someone asking a question, and then the teacher will do something like this. They'll say a response like, "Oh, the ego is so full of resistance." Or let's say someone goes to the teacher and says, "I've been doing this practice for a while, but it's not really working." And the teacher will say something like, "If you want the truth, if you want enlightenment, as a drowning person wants air, as someone whose head is underwater wants air, then all obstacles will be swept aside and the truth will reveal itself." So on the surface, this sounds like some wisdom, because it's taught often that the need, the desire for liberation has to be burning. But what the teacher did in that particular interaction was to disregard the person's question and disregard, sweep aside that the teacher's teaching isn't working, and then subtly and spiritually turn it into an attack on the student. Oh, if you only wanted enlightenment more, then there would be no problems. So technically this is called gaslighting, where any criticism, critique, but more specifically, any challenge to the teacher, or in this case, the teaching, is turned around so that it actually becomes an attack, a judgment, a put down of the person raising the objection. Now, of course, this is a classic cult technique, to where the leader and the teacher and the organization are considered perfect, and anyone who criticizes or even implies that the teacher or teaching is less than perfect, or the organization is vigorously attacked, shunned. So not all Neo-Advaita teachers are teaching a cult or have created a physical cult, but they use a lot of the same tactics. And this is one of them, turning around any criticism onto the person raising the criticism. So this was made very clear to me. I was giving a talk and a teaching on the spiritual teachings of Christ, sort of separate Jesus from the religion, separate Jesus from all the crap that's been added on, and talking about, well, what's the spiritual path divorced from the dogma that Christ taught? And so someone came into that and started sharing Neo-Advaita nonsense. And so one of the first things they did was to say, and so in that talk, I was teaching a very specific technique of receiving divine energy, of having faith, taught by a very pure, in my view, a very pure spiritual teacher. And so this person comes in and then they start saying things like, well, what about if we just drop the mind and drop all sense of separation and realize that we are God? And I said, okay, well, that's not what this, so the person's, the teacher whose teachings I was representing is named Bruno Gröning. I'm like, okay, well, that's not what Bruno teaches. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite of what Bruno teaches. And they're like, oh, yes, I so appreciate the simplicity of Bruno's teachings. And I love how specific he is. But then this person came and did it again with some more Neo-Advaita nonsense. And I finally said to them, and they did it a couple more times, and I finally said, look, it feels to me like you're teaching. Please stop. This is and here's what they said. And sorry, the story got long, but here's the point of that story. They said, oh, I'm not teaching. I don't know anything. So that's a classic example of Neo-Advaita nonsense, where someone will come and they'll do something. They'll be this person was teaching, right? Like, what about this technique? What about this philosophy? You should try this. In a non-Neo-Advaita gathering. And then when I pointed out what they're doing, like, oh, I wasn't teaching. Oh, I don't know anything. And so that's the twisted part, is Neo-Advaita teachers, and then it becomes Neo-Advaita followers, become exquisitely skilled in these weird manipulative mind games. And so then this person emailed me and they said, I wasn't trying to teach. I was just trying to connect. Well, it really didn't feel like connecting. And then they said, after all, truth is one, which here's what gets really twisted. Yes, I believe ultimately there is one supreme truth or reality, but there are very many different teachings for how to get to that one reality, and even teachings, various attempts to describe that one truth or one reality. I was presenting the teachings of Bruno Gröning. He has a very specific path and and this person was presenting Neo-Advaita stuff, which is very different from the teacher that I was presenting. But see what the person did. And this is so subtle. So I'm sorry this explanation is taking a while, but I hope if you bear with me, you can see the subtlety of the mind games that religion plays, that cults play, and that Neo-Advaita plays. So I'm offering this one teaching. Someone else offers a different teaching. I point out, hey, what you're sharing is different. What you're sharing is contradictory to what I'm sharing. And then the person says, oh, I was just trying to connect. And after all, truth is one. So what that person did in that little statement, oh, after all, truth is one, is they completely swept aside the facts. So let's back up again and look at the facts. The facts were they were offering a different teaching than what I was teaching, and that there are numerous teachings. But with that one little statement that sounds so spiritual, truth is one, they just swept that aside, almost as if to say, well, what happened between you and I didn't actually happen. I was just seeking to connect. I wasn't teaching. I don't know anything. But by the way, truth is one. So as far as twisted interactions go, this was not a big deal at all. But it really highlights the games. What I realized is Neo-Advaita is games within games within games. But if only if it was just a game. Because my mind, and I've met many other people who would say in maybe their own way the same thing, your mind can get trapped in these games. I shared on my last broadcast this poor guy who basically asked the same question for 15 years, and the teacher gave the same answer for 15 years. I watched it with my own eyes. It was heartbreaking. The question was, I can experience the self very easily when I'm alone or just meditating or here in satsang, but when I go out and about, I'm not really able to do it. And the teacher would just say nonsense like the self is always aware, turn away from objects, the self doesn't come and go. So who is it that's aware of the coming and going? What were some of the other things he said? Who is aware of the one that comes and goes? There is something that comes and goes, but that's not the real. So turn away from that back to the source. For 15 years, this guru told their desperate student who came week after week. In fact, this Neo-Advaita satsang met multiple times a week. So this poor guy was going, giving money, showing up multiple times a week, being given the same nonsense over and over and over. And how did this guy get stuck in it? Well, the way I got stuck in it and the way we all get stuck in it. Well, I'm not going to say we all get stuck in the same way, but there's some key points. First and foremost, we think the Neo-Advaita teaching is the truth. I'm convinced that we as human beings are truth-seeking beings. We are wired biologically and spiritually to seek the truth. And so once we think something is true, it's kind of hard to unthink that. Second of all, we think the teacher is enlightened. Once I thought someone was enlightened is one of the biggest ways of giving your power away. I became like other people, you become like a child. You become utterly dependent on that person because within the Neo-Advaita teaching and within any true liberation-based teaching, the idea is if I follow this path, I will become completely free. I'll become completely free of all suffering, of all problems. And right there connected with the desire for truth, we all want freedom. In fact, I would argue that we all want freedom, peace, more than anything else. I would argue it's our deepest desire. We may not be aware of it. We may be chasing other, sex, drugs, rock and roll, money, fame, relationship, creativity. I'm not saying those things are bad, but we seek those things because we're really looking for happiness. But that happiness is temporary, so we're looking for permanent happiness. And so these Neo-Advaita teachers say, they usually don't directly say it, but they'll imply that they have found perfect, permanent happiness, that they have found freedom from all suffering, and some way, somehow, we start to believe that. And once we believe that, then we are super stuck because it's a huge power giveaway. and become very dependent on such a person. The third way, in my view, is that we get a taste. So around any person who's had any kind of spiritual awakening, you may have noticed that there's kind of a good feeling. Some of these teachers are able to pass on a kind of energy blessing. Some of them quite powerful. This particular Neo-Advaita teacher, he radiated energy. You could feel it in the parking lot of their temple. I took someone there, and the person was like, oh, we got in the parking lot and stepped out of the car, and the person was like, oh my God, what is this? Every time I walked into that teacher's temple, my mind got completely silent and I felt peace. Not 9 out of 10 times, 10 out of 10 times. So I don't claim to have all the answers how, but these teachers, and it's not just Neo-Advaita teachers, any person who's had any kind of spiritual awakening, again, a spiritual awakening does not equal enlightenment, they're able to pass along a blessing. And so we get a taste, and we think, oh my God, this must be true. And you get a taste, and thank you for the comments. I'll get to them in a minute or two. And so that taste leads us to think, oh my God, this teaching is true. Oh my God, this teacher must be realized. Oh my God, this is what I want. This is the truth. And then lastly, the distorted, twisted teachings create this mind maze where you are constantly trying to figure it out. Like this poor guy who went for 15 years. I can only imagine what the dialogue was like in his head. Of like, okay, I can feel the self. I'm aware of awareness when I'm sitting here meditating. But when I get up, it vanishes, it's gone. I know it's there, but I can't find it. But there's no me who can find it. And the teacher says to turn away from objects. So, okay, I'm going to less focus on the world and more focus on the self. But when I do that, it only works if I stand still and I've got to go to work, but it's always here, but I'm not aware of it. But Ramana Maharshi said, the self always shines. Who is it who's asking all these questions? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who is aware of not being aware? I can't even imagine. Well, I can imagine because I was caught in those. That's why I call it a mind maze. I was caught in that. I was caught in that for about 20 years. You know, there's the phrase mind fuck. Like something that just like, I don't know how to put it into words, but you know, like something that just like makes you go, like where your mind just can't work right anymore, you know? Like gaslighting or cult-like dynamics are a great example of a mind fuck, you know, where it's just like, can't compute. And Neo-Advaita just installs to where and I've heard this from other people, you internalize the nonsense teaching that you receive from the teacher, and then you start, when I say you, I mean we start to like become our own Neo-Advaita teacher where we like keep the insanity going. And that's why I say it's a twisted religion. I talked again in part 1 about how it's a religion. This part I'm focusing a little more on twisted. So let's take a look at some of these beautiful comments. Rowan Growan, this is really spot on about what is wrong with contemporary Advaita. So I just, I'll read what you said first. It all goes wrong on so many levels. They all just shout everything is one or everything is love. Such bogus people want to buy. Rowan Growan. Beautifully said. So I take issue with the word contemporary Advaita because that makes it sound like it's, I just prefer Neo-Advaita or fake Advaita. Contemporary Advaita just sounds like that it has some legitimacy. And I know you don't mean it that way. And it all goes wrong on so many levels. So many levels it goes wrong. They all just shout everything is one or everything is love. Such bogus. So beautifully said, Rowan. So Neo-Advaita is a bunch of bullshit slogans that have some truth to them. Like, I believe there's truth to the assertion that everything is one, or that there's some level, there's different ways to say it. Everything's interconnected, everything is one. But that teaching can be very harmful if you misuse it. For example, let's say you're in an abusive relationship and it's horrible. It's draining you. It's tearing you apart. And you're like, everything is one. And so like your partner comes and does horrible things to you and you feel terrible. And then you go back into your room and you're like, everything is one. Everything is one. Everything is love. And then you feel good. And then you go out and you get the abuse again. So this is part of why traditional Advaita is only done under the guidance of a guru, because Neo-Advaita and misuse of things like everything is one or everything is love, it robs you of your capacity to navigate life and to have discernment. And by the way, everything is one can be very dangerous. And I gave the example of an abusive relationship, but we need the capacity to discern. In traditional Advaita, it's called Dharma and Adharma. Dharma is means that which leads to harmony. And Adharma is that which is harmful to harmony. Or you also could say harmonious to life and that which is harmful to life. And so without that discernment, Neo-Advaita will make you completely dysfunctional, because you don't have a capacity to discern or make decisions or how to live a harmonious life. You just trance out. So thank you, Rowan, growing, beautiful. Activate your thyroid writes, I practice Kriya Yoga, and even though most of it is based on pure technique, I notice traces of neo-non-duality in it. Also, some of the group members would say things like, oh, Osho has something to say. Yeah, so part of why I love Kriya Yoga. Yoga is one. So first of all, Vedanta is just one school of Indian philosophy, and yoga is another, and not yoga like that you find at yoga studios or most yoga studios. Yoga is a philosophy that's almost no philosophy. It's pretty much practice and technique. And so I have high respect for it. And actually, I was initiated into Kriya Yoga a long time ago. I have respect for that practice. But part of why I keep doing this channel is because Neo-Advaita is cropping everywhere into everything in the spiritual world. And now what I'm starting to notice is there are people who are coming up with healing modalities or self-improvement techniques that are completely based in Neo-Advaita. So sadly, it's everywhere. It truly is a virus. And there's a traditional teacher. I'm going to find his. He called it a pandemic. He made a great video called "The Other Global Pandemic." So this guy's really interesting. He was a traditional Achinta Beta, which is another school of Vedanta teacher, and then he started to explore Advaita Vedanta. So there's a link to his video. Rowan Groen wrote, beautifully said. All traditions have some sort of common language, but in fact, they can mean something totally different while telling almost the same thing. So beautifully said. So beautifully said. So this came to me very, very clearly when I started studying with an actual Advaita Vedanta guru, meaning they had a guru who had a guru who were part of a tradition going all the way back to Shankara. And what I learned is in traditional Advaita, there's very precise definitions, very precise, almost annoyingly precise. The thing is, this is very important. So if I was to give you directions to my house, but I didn't give you precise directions, would you make it to my house? If I was like, go for a ways, then turn left, then go for a while and turn right, then maybe I give you, then go 1.5 miles and turn left, and then your second left, and then go for a little bit longer, and I'm on the right. You would never fucking get here. You would never get here. And that's just going for a walk or driving a car. We're talking about one of the most subtle endeavors a human being can undertake. A complete redoing of their emotional, mental, religious, spiritual, existential relationship with themselves, with life, with God, with the world. A complete you could say rewiring, reprogramming, relanguaging, reparadigming. And so it requires absolutely precise language. And I got to tell you, I got a little, there were moments where I was like, oh, this is so refreshing. What is enlightenment? Traditional Advaita doesn't use the word enlightenment. What is the self? Traditional Advaita, they don't even like to use the word self. They say Atman. And then what does Atman mean? The teacher I studied with, whenever you read the word Atman, just think I. Don't add anything else to it, just I. What does God mean? Well, they don't use Bhagavan, and they have different words for God. And just like, it's like this, and it's so refreshing. Because in Neo-Advaita, you'll get things like Rowan said, everything is one. Well, what the F does that mean? Or just let everything go. What does that mean? Just drop the mind. Okay, well, what's the mind? Traditional Advaita has the mind, in traditional Advaita, the mind has different layers, and you come to understand the different layers, and there's one layer about desire, one layer about making a decision, it's very precise. And, negate everything that's not the self. Okay, well, what's not the self? Traditional Advaita has these different models. It was so medicinal for me to finally get precise definitions. Because as Rowan Groen so beautifully said, they all just shout everything is one, or everything is love, or you are the self, or you're already enlightened, or just inquire, or drop the mind, like these slogans that have some truth to them, but have no precise definition. And worse, if you start questioning the definitions or you try and get precise answers, then if you get too confrontive, you'll be attacked. You'll be judged or put down, or something will be turned back around to you. If you just inquire, all questions will be answered, or some things like that, or some nonsense like that. So I always love when people share their experiences or thoughts. And so I want to acknowledge I rambled a little bit about this little tiny interaction I had with someone. The interaction was not a big deal, but that interaction highlights the subtle levels of manipulation that cults and Neo-Advaita seek to engage in. And I cannot even tell you how many times I went to a Neo-Advaita satsang. I went in with a bunch of questions. I would get high off the energy. I'd get high off the meditative practice. I would ask a question. The teacher would be like, da 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 da. Like, if you just look to that which is changeless, then I'm just making something up. If you just inquire into that which never changes, all your problems will be solved. And I would be like, oh my God, that's it. That's the answer I've been looking for my whole life. And then an hour later, like I couldn't even remember what the teacher said. And sometimes I would take notes. I'd be like, okay, did it? Like, I just got to inquire into the changeless, and then all my problems will be solved. But that's not it's not a complete teaching. It's an incomplete teaching. And to worse, it's a teaching that I was not ripe for. I really appreciate everyone's time, energy, and attention. Time, energy, and attention are limited. I'm honored that you chose to share some of that with me. And I do this channel to help other people, but also to help myself. Mew wrote, how do you make most use of being in a meditative state? I don't know how to answer that, Mew. It really depends on that's a big question. I think that's beyond the scope of what I would say is it really depends upon where the person is in their journey, what meditative technique they're using, how their life is structured, what are their goals in life, and it's a very individual. I would say there's no universal answer to that question. And in fact, I think I'll close with that. I'm going to a quote from Ramana Maharshi. Hold on one moment. One moment. So Paramahansa Yogananda, who became a very famous teacher, asked Ramana Maharshi, what is the best way of living? It differs accordingly as one is a yanai, knower of the self, or an ayanai. The outlook differs according to the sight of the person. And then he asked, how is the spiritual upliftment of people to be affected? What are the instructions to be given them? They differ, and Ramana Maharshi said, they differ according to the temperament of the individual and the spiritual ripeness of their mind. There cannot be any spiritual instruction en masse. And that's the fundamental difference between Neo-Advaita and traditional Advaita. Neo-Advaita offers a false formula to everyone and says this is the only way, hence it's cult-like. It offers a formula, hence it's religious-like. like a religion. It gives people a taste of the bliss and engages in manipulative, deceitful mind games that sound spiritual. Hence, it's twisted. And hence, this particular series of videos. Neo-Advaita is a demonic, twisted religion. Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that it's a bad question. It's just just to go to what Ramana Maharshi said, is it just really depends on the individual, and I don't feel qualified. I don't, even if I knew you better, I might be able to offer suggestions, but yeah. But as I've said before, and I've said again, I'm not a guru. I'm someone who's recovering, who has recovered from false gurus, and I hope to just share about my journey on that process to help other people break free from false gurus. Thank you so very much. So grateful for everyone who drops by this channel. Big love.